Is Venezuela on the brink of collapse? The country is facing one of its worst economic crises in years, and a political standoff threatens to bring down the government of Nicolás Maduro. So how has this affected Venezuelans, and what impact will it have on the region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Foliba Thibault. Bread, medicine, toilet paper. These are just some of the basic necessities Venezuelans are struggling to find. The falling global oil prices have hit the country hard. Public services are disappearing one after the other. American officials are warning the country is on the brink of collapse. President Nicolás Maduro has announced a state of emergency to deal with the economic crisis. He says it's necessary to combat what he calls foreign aggression, which he blames for Venezuela's problems. Government officials say the state of emergency will allow better distribution of resources, but it could also give security forces more power, and critics are also worried about Maduro's threat to seize closed factories. While speaking to a rally of his supporters on Saturday, President Maduro said the vast majority of businessmen in this country are producing and are willing to work. Nobody here is whining. That's why I say whoever wants to sabotage this country should leave this country, and whoever stops factory production to sabotage the people, we should put them in handcuffs and take them to prison. While the political crisis in Venezuela was born out of an economic one, low global oil prices have severely hit its economy, which shrunk by almost 6% last year. And inflation is estimated to be around 180%. That's led to a lot of political pressure on President Maduro. Opinion polls suggest 70% of Venezuelans think he should step down. The opposition won the majority of seats in the National Assembly last December, but since then nearly all of its decisions have been struck down by the Supreme Court. So now almost 2 million people have signed the opposition's petition to force Maduro out of office. So where is Venezuela headed? Let's bring in our guest for today's discussion. In Washington, D.C., Sonia Schott, an independent journalist and political analyst. In Caracas, Daniel Fermin, researcher for the Center of Political Studies at the Andres Bello Catholic University. And in New York, we have Vanessa Neumann, founder and CEO of trade integrity consultancy firm Asymmetrica. Thank you all. Welcome to Inside Story. Daniel, in Caracas, if I can start with you. There are those who say that Venezuela is on the brink of total collapse, economic collapse, political collapse, and social collapse. Would you agree with that assessment? Just how dire is the situation in the country today?
Well, I would agree with that. Venezuela is facing the worst economic crisis in contemporary history. You have profiled the situation very accurately. The long queues to get food and medicine, there's shortages, long lines. It's a very dire situation in Venezuela. We are on the verge of collapse, if we can't already say that we are in collapse. Venezuelan economy is going through a very, very rough crisis, and the people have had enough. Our recent studies show that 86% of the population say the situation is either bad or very bad. And when we ask the people, yes, the situation is bad now, but how do you see the situation in the next 12 months? The Venezuelans answer, over 62% of Venezuelans answer that it will get worse. And over 60% of Venezuelans blame the government directly for the crisis.
Right.
So it is a very accurate assessment.
Just how has the crisis affected the day-to-day life of Venezuelans? You mentioned the long queues. Is this just in certain parts of the country, or is it throughout the entire country where we see these long queues of people lining up for basic necessities like toilet paper?
It is throughout the entire country. The entire country is going through this very complicated situation. Venezuelans in Caracas, in the capital city, we have a very tough time accessing basic necessities, but the people in the interior of the country, in the states, in the province, have it even worse. And we're not just talking about medicine, we're not just talking about basic things such as toilet paper, we're talking about food, and that's where the situation escalates. because when people feel they can't buy bread, when people feel they can't buy cooking oil, when people feel they can't buy the most basic things to cook with, then the conflict starts to get another tone. And Venezuelans, we have to place our fingers on fingerprint scanners in order to buy medicine and food. They tell us that there's controls over your ID number. You can only buy on certain days. You can only buy certain quantities of food. So this all boils down to a model, a political and economic control model that has decimated the economic apparatus, that has decimated national production, expropriating businesses, expropriating the producers of food and basic means. And now that oil prices are down and the government did not have the provision to save for rainy days, now Venezuelans are left with nothing in a country that only produces oil, that imports everything. Our creditors, we have no money to pay them. The country is severely in debt.
Sure.
And the government just lost control of the situation.
So a very dire situation.
Crises,
a very dire situation. Let's hear from our other guests now. Let's hear from Vanessa in New York. Vanessa, this is a country that used to be the most developed nation in Latin America, with the highest consumption rates in the region, the largest oil reserves in the world. How do we get to this point today? How did we get to this economic crisis? How come Venezuela is worse off than any other country in the region? What are the factors that contributed to this crisis?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. When I was a child, you had the Concorde would fly to Venezuela, and they would have TV programs where you had sort of segments that would actually make fun of Americans as being less privileged than Venezuelans. So the contrast from that to this today is shocking. It's basically, well, the factors are, as Daniel Fermin pointed out, economic control, misappropriation led by political ideology. A lot of the money was squandered when the oil prices were high, not just in what they call the misiones, which were poverty reduction programs, but they were poverty reduction programs that were very much tied to political loyalty. They were not set up to be sustainable. They were handouts, and you would sign up and you'd vote. But more importantly than that, a lot of money was squandered in setting up exerting regional control, giving money to Bolivia, Argentina, the Kirchner campaign, and a very famous scandal that was called Suitcase Gate, which was also a peddling of influence for Iran toward Argentina on behalf of Argentina. There was lots of money given away to build roads in other countries. And there's also a tremendous amount of corruption. I mean, the kleptocracy is mind-blowing. There's at least $80 billion missing that is being sought in Swiss bank accounts that belongs to the regime. And the people know this. And the regime has gotten involved in basically criminalizing and becoming a drug trafficking organization rather than ruling the country and diversifying the economy and developing it the way it should have done.
Okay, Vanessa, thank you for that. Sonia, let's hear your thoughts on the current crisis in Venezuela. There are those who say that the real culprit here of this crisis is Chavismo, the ruling philosophy named for Chavez and carried forward by Nicolás Maduro. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think Chavismo is to blame for the current situation that Venezuela finds itself in?
Well, actually, we have to think about that the Chavismo is 15 years in power right now in Venezuela. But the question right now to point out is that we all know that President Maduro is not going to finish his term. There is no way under the circumstances that President Maduro is going to finish. Now the political game is who is going to replace President Maduro in power. And then we are seeing the two forces, the Chavismo and the opposition leaders, trying to fight and to put their candidates, the opposition leaders or the Chavismo leaders. I think on the Chavismo side, there is one probably candidate which will be the vice president right now, Aristóbulo Istúriz. And this is right now what we see the game right now in Caracas.
Okay.
The government is trying to delay the recall referendum process in order to meet the half term of Maduro, and then to replace Maduro with Aristóbulo Istúriz. And that's the opposition is having is in a hurry in order
but the
to
opposition,
meet the opposition, in order to recall the referendum.
The opposition, Sonia, has not been successful until now in trying to oust Maduro using legal means. I mean, you say he's not going to finish his term, and I want to ask Daniel in Caracas if he shares that view. Is Maduro really going to go quietly? He seems quite defiant.
He's not going to go quietly. As a matter of fact, what we've seen since the December 6 elections, where the opposition won the National Assembly in a landslide victory, is the whole state, not only the executive power, not only the president, but also the Supreme Tribunal, also the armed forces, closing ranks with the president in setting up obstacles to that political change that Venezuelans expressed as their will on December 6th. So he's not going to go quietly. What we've seen now is the opposition trying to call for a referendum to recall Mr. Maduro's term, and the obstacles, institutional obstacles, by the National Electoral Council, which is composed of they call them 5 rectors, the authorities. And 4 of those rectors are openly Chavista. And they are doing a smaller effort to conceal that. And what we see now is a lot of institutional obstacles, as I just said. And his strategy is trying to get to 2017, because if the referendum, or if a possible referendum, is called after January of 2017, then there wouldn't be a new election to elect a president, but the vice president, who is now Mr. Aristóbulo Istúriz, as Sonia just said, but it could be anyone the president appoints from now until then would assume office. So Chavismo it's betting on a solution where they might lose power, or Maduro might be recalled, but they, as a party, still conserve the power, and that's the main card they're playing right now.
Vanessa in New York, what do you make of the opposition's strategy right now? I mean, they have this strategy that they've been trying since they won the National Assembly in December. Is it going to work? And also, the opposition has been calling for foreign political intervention from Mercosur, from the OAS as well. Is that going to happen? And do you see Maduro leaving quietly?
First of all, no, I don't see Maduro leaving quietly. And in addition to what Daniel was talking about, we now have a 2-day work week. The government offices only work Monday and Tuesday. That is because of the tremendous electricity shortages. There are rolling blackouts throughout the country. That's what they're blaming it on. But of course, it's pretty handy to also delay the processing of the recall referendum. They got 10 times the votes that they needed. And now the government is saying that they need to go through each and every one of those 1.85 million signatures to verify them and see whether they're accurate. With the 2-day work week, that's going to take a very long time and try and delay it. The thing with the opposition has a number of strategies which won't really work immediately. However, one question is that Maduro, they're saying, is not actually even a Venezuelan, that he was born in Colombia. So they're having a bit of their own birther issue that they want to see his birth certificate. President Santos doesn't want to get involved because he's too busy negotiating with the FARC. So he doesn't want to wade into that. The recall referendum, we're hoping will happen this year, but at the way things are going, there might just be a revolt. People are looting. There was looting even over the weekend, right after the state of emergency was declared. I've seen video footage, and the people are just taking into shopping malls, and if the military fires on the people, you'll see something akin to the Arab Spring. So this whole concept of they're trying to just survive and push the recall referendum until next year. But there's no food in the supermarkets this week or next week. They go hungry. It's game over for Chavismo.
Daniel, in Caracas, Maduro has tried to blame what he calls foreign aggression for Venezuela's problems. I wonder, does this resonate today still with Venezuelans? Are people convinced by this rhetoric of an external threat, a conspiracy against Venezuela?
It does not resonate. It does not resonate at all. What we've seen in our studies and our polling is that the vast majority of Venezuelans blame the government and the president directly for the situation, for the crisis. And when you start asking about the alternative explanations the government has given, what they call an economic war, or the aggression, or the imperialist agenda, it does not poll, it does not even register with Venezuelans. So it's all seen as excuses, and the state of emergency has little to do with the economic situation. It's more to do with how a government that has lost all popular support, how can they control society, even when they have so much power in the institutions. Right. They have lost popular support, and they don't have support of the National Assembly. So what they're left with is repression and the use of military and police force against the people demonstrating on the streets.
So, Sonia, will the government's latest measures, the measures announced by President Maduro, the state of emergency, the occupation of certain plants, do you think that will do anything at all to revive the economy?
No, actually, there is no way that with these measures the economy will be revived in Venezuela. And I think the key point right now is that among Chavistas, Maduro is not really very popular. That's why they are looking to replace him, but try to manipulate and to gain time in order to replace by someone in their own file.
So what's going to happen first, then, you think?
This is what we are seeing right now.
What's going to happen first, do you think? What's going to happen first? Are we going to see the economy collapse first, or Maduro's government collapse first? Which comes first, in your opinion?
Well, I think probably Maduro is going to collapse first, because the crisis is going to boost out Maduro of power.
Okay. Vanessa, what would be the implications then of a political collapse first, as Sonia says, for the rest of the region, for the neighboring countries, and also of an economic collapse? Because, as we've said, Venezuela was an economic powerhouse. What would an economic and political collapse mean for the rest of the Latin America region?
Well, Colombia in particular is extremely worried. I've been to meetings with the Colombian government, and they're very concerned about a humanitarian crisis. When I was a child, you'd have a bit like the Mexican immigrants or Central American immigrants in the U.S., are sort of the undocumented worker class in the U.S. When I was a child, it was the Colombians were the undocumented worker class in Venezuela. Under Chavismo, that has reversed completely. So now you already have a lot of Venezuelans have gone to Colombia, which is a much better socio-political position, and they're concerned that there's just going to be a flooding of Venezuelans into Colombia or even into Brazil, which are the two main borders. So that they're worried about that. I also spoke recently with the senior advisor to the new Argentine president, Mauricio Macri, who said this is going to change. Venezuela is going to change very, very quickly. Suddenly, you think it's not going to end, and then one day it'll be over. And that Argentina and Macri will support the reconciliation of Venezuela and a peaceful transition. They have already come out and said that not very strongly. They're looking to the Vatican to also broker sort of a peaceful transition, because the church is still very important in Venezuela, and they did that also in Cuba. And maybe under Temer, now that Temer has taken over Brazil, the getting rid of Dilma and the corruption and the scandal is something that resonates with Venezuelans who see their own government so corrupted.
What about the United States? What about Washington? How does Washington view this current crisis? Obama hasn't been speaking a lot about it, perhaps out of fear of being accused of meddling in Venezuela's affairs.
Correct.
How concerned are they about what's going on?
Well, they're extremely concerned because they don't want to see a humanitarian crisis. They don't want to see major bloodshed or Venezuela collapse into chaos. I mean, what is it? What if there is something like an Arab Spring type of revolt? You have a lot of, not only do you have the government and the military, you have also colectivos, which are these criminal gangs that were originally armed as sort of defense forces for the government. You also have just plain old-fashioned criminal gangs that now dominate so much territory. They're actually referred to in Spanish as areas of peace. So suddenly, if you have a chaos or total blackout in Venezuela, then you have all these are not only civilians and military and Chavistas in opposition, you also have criminal gangs battling it out. It's a recipe, as we have seen in the Middle East, for chaos.
Right.
So the U.S. is very concerned about it, but they will not intervene because, at the moment, unless there's a crisis, because they realize that that's absolutely counterproductive.
But there is a
in Latin
crisis. So
America.
you say they won't intervene unless there's a crisis, but there is a crisis right now, isn't there?
Unless there's a large humanitarian crisis and violence.
Okay.
Because any intervention now by the U.S. It will just backfire. It plays into the Chavista narrative that this is some sort of economic war. So I think the only way I see the U.S. really sending in anything akin to troops or defense or even doing humanitarian drops of food or exfiltration of their own personnel would have to be, or evacuation of Americans would have to be under a riot situation, which, given the frequency of looting, is possibly not that far away.
Let's hear from Daniel now in Caracas. Daniel, the elephant in the room right now is Venezuela's military and the possibility of a coup. Is that a likely scenario, in your opinion?
Well, the military has become the main basis, the main pillar of support of the Chavismo regime. That is very important for everyone to know. What we're seeing, even though Mr. Maduro is a civilian, is basically a military government. Even the military presence in the government, in the regime, has increased. There's more military men and women in key positions of government than with Maduro than there were even with Chavez. So that's important to point out. When people draw these scenarios in which the armed forces take over power in a coup, I think they're skipping a very important fact, that is that the armed forces are already in power. They have been, their prestige, their trust among Venezuelans has decreased sharply. When we see our studies, it shows that only 44% of Venezuelans trust the armed forces. That is a very atypical situation for us. The armed forces is normally among the 3-4 institutions that Venezuelans used to trust more, and in that line of reasoning, there's a lot of historical baggage of a country that has been ruled by the military in the majority of its history. But now, not only because of violations of human rights, but also because of being linked to drug trafficking and at international scale, the armed forces do not have that prestige, and the armed forces are already in government. So I don't see that as a likely scenario. I do see that some people are seeing it even in a light that we might call wishful thinking, but us Venezuelans and civilians and Democrats, we do not want to see that scenario play out. What we want to see, and that is very important for everyone to understand as well, Venezuelans want to resolve this peacefully, democratically, and constitutionally. And it shows in all the studies and it shows in all the polls how Venezuelans truly value the democratic system, and they value the democratic ways and means of resolving the crisis, even against a government that has shown that it is not democratic.
Okay, let's hear from Sonia now in Washington. Sonia, we have a tense political environment right now in Venezuela, economic challenges. Where is this country headed, and can this crisis be resolved in a peaceful manner?
Well, I doubt it, because we have reached the peak of the tensions between the government and the opposition. And that's why I don't think there is going to be a peaceful solution unless the government led the democratic mechanism, like the recalled referendum, in order to try to bring some changes in the country. So, and I don't see, because the government is trying to delay all the process, the democratic process, and trying to use some force in order to try to manipulate time and means. So I don't see why how this is going to be a peaceful process. This is going to be a tough fight between forces, political forces in Venezuela. And that's why there are some concerns, not just only in the region, but in the U.S. too. So, but this is, like Daniel said, this is something that the Venezuelans has to resolve by themselves.
Okay, a very unpredictable situation. Thank you all for an interesting discussion. Sonia Shaw, Daniel Fermin, and Vanessa Neumann. And thank you as well for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter, of course. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Feliba Thibault, and the whole team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.